I hope you had wonderful coffee session. We are now moving on to our first session, and I will hand over to my colleague, Mr. Christian Peter, who will be moderating this session. Thank you, Christian. Welcome. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so can I ask Michael Bekele and Dr. Oguge to come? Can you hear? Yeah, okay, this is working. Okay, good. So I hope you come back refreshed. You met new faces. You actually made contact with counterparts that you can rely on and reach out to later on. I'm really excited for this panel for two reasons. One is, as it has said before by colleagues, the World Bank has recently changed its mission, and it's about poverty reduction on a livable planet. And I do think how do we do this is very important for us to look at, and I do think that through this forum we actually can provide a number of answers to this. One of the important things to keep in mind is that for the World Bank, biodiversity and ecosystem services loss is a development issue. It is a development issue because without it, as Valerie has so eloquently explained to us, we are not really getting anywhere. But one doesn't go with the other, and we need to consider that we have a triple crisis. That is not only the biodiversity and ecosystem services loss, plus climate change, plus pollution, but we really need to look at different options that really work for the well-being of this planet. And so in the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, was very clear that it needs to be for people and it needs to be for the planet. So I think what we want to do in this particular session is to look at how do we make sure that we get the economics right? How do we make sure that we actually provide development options to people to take care of and not destruct nature or the biodiversity and ecosystem services? So in this respect, what we have now, we have a panel, distinguished panel. It's a manel, actually. I don't know whether you know this word, but we have to really, and I don't know how this did happen, but it's a manel. It's a panel with man. So let's see how we deal with this. Let's bring something else together. So in this particular panel, we have, we will hear about a number of, I wouldn't call it studies, but what we will hear about a number of analytical pieces that look exactly at this economics, at the economic case for nature. So we will hear, in our first session, we will hear about work that has been led by UNEP, IUCN, and ILO, the International Labour Organization, on decent work in nature-based solutions. We will hear, and this has a little bit already mentioned by Valerie, about a study that we did in the World Bank on how protected areas can actually provide income and be a driver for economic growth in and around protected areas. And then we have, we hear from a study done, financed, I guess, from USAID on how nature and wildlife and landscapes can actually provide economic value. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Michael, and this is now, let me do this, try to do this. Liu Qisong, this is, okay, I hope I didn't butcher it, who is currently leading the work on nature-based solutions for ILO. He has been working in the field of green and gray infrastructure development and employment creation for more than 20 years. And his work incorporates economic and employment policy, infrastructure development and nature-based solutions, social protection, and green job. We have Bekele Shifarav, who you know, who is the program leader of the Global Program on Sustainability. He will talk about the banking in protected areas study that has been done by the World Bank. He's a senior environmental economist, has been working in that space for the past 25 years, including in evaluation, including on climate change issues, agri-food systems, and others. And then we have Professor Nicholas Oguge of the University of Nairobi, who is a professor for environmental policy at the Center for Advanced Studies and Environmental Law and Policies at the University of Nairobi. His expertise has expertise in conservation, biodiversity, ecosystem services, indigenous knowledge systems in natural resource management. But more importantly, he is currently the lead author for the IPBES Business and Biodiversity Assessment and the lead in development of natural capital accounting in payment for environmental services frameworks for Kenya. So without further ado, Michael, you have the word.
Thank you very much, Christian. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, and also all those online. Thank you also to the Global Policy Forum for the invitation to present this work, which I'd like to share with you today. So the work I'm going to share is all based on a report called or a series of reports actually called Decent Work in Nature-Based Solutions, which is a collaboration between the ILO, UNEP, and IUCN. So really, maybe just a quick mention here, what's really the rationale for the report? I mean, even in the previous, Valerie mentioned the question of jobs and how nature contributes to jobs and GDP several times, and I think this is exactly the rationale for the report, is trying to understand exactly how nature investments, the use of nature-based solutions influence jobs and how we can optimize the kind of employment and job outcomes from these investments. And it's really about contributing to the policy space and particularly around policy coherence, because job policies by themselves don't stand alone. They link to economic policies, to finance policies, to sectoral policies, and it's trying to get the job angle into this policy space and create more coherent policies in the process. So the first report, the 2022 report, was launched at the CBD COP in Montreal in 2022, and there's a commitment from the three partners to produce four more reports every 2 years, also coinciding with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And so I'll present some of the findings from the first report, but the subsequent reports will also delve into more specific sectors or specific questions of interest. This, of course, is quite a large field, but I think important here is that how we treat the underlying assumption from the report is that, specifically when it comes to nature-based solutions, that we see that as a method, a modality for investing in renewable natural capital. And so how do we then harness these investments in renewable natural capital through nature-based solutions, and how do we also harness the kind of job outcomes? In this specific report, we focus more on the employment impacts from implementing nature-based solutions, not so much from the job impacts of having enriched or increased natural capital. But we also building on previous work done by the ILO, most notably the report came out in 2018, where we found that about 1.2 billion jobs globally are directly dependent on ecosystem services, and even more, of course, indirectly. So this is, of course, a large area of interest for us. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but if you look at the targets from the Global Biodiversity Framework, I think 4 of them really have quite important and particular job angles or entry points. Sustainable use, of course, links very clearly to job markets. Sustainable agriculture, aquaculture and fisheries, and forestry, probably the most important, at least from an employment side, given the large share of workers in the agriculture sector. Nature-based solutions, the ecosystem services, also the implementation of these have important job implications. And then there is also around accountability and biodiversity integration, where there are more knowledge-based jobs that are involved in how do you monitor biodiversity, how do you monetize it, how do you finance it, etc. Now, so now I'm going to shift a little bit into some of the key issues discussed in this version of the report. So I think one is to marry three key concepts. One is around decent work and how we as the ILO understand decent work and its 4 pillars, which is around employment creation. It's about minimum rights at work. It's about access to social protection and the importance of social dialogue and involvement of all stakeholders. So that's the one pillar. The second is around just transition. And actually, in this, what we have noted that while in the climate and energy space in particular, the question of just transition has gained a lot of traction, a lot of interest. In this space around biodiversity and nature, not so much yet. But if you look at the transitions that need to happen in agriculture or around land use, there are huge just transition issues that emerge. And I think how we deal with that is going to be critical for how actually support for biodiversity investment is gonna unfold. So that's the second part. And the third is really unpacking nature-based solutions based on the new UNEA definition that was adopted just before we launched the report. I mean, the ILO Just Transition Guidelines have been launched in 2015. I think, again, important here that they were not about climate or the energy transition. They were about a transition to sustainable economies and societies. And so they cover the entire green transition, including those involved in the whole biodiversity discussions. So one of the elements the report seems to tackle is think about a measurement framework for jobs and decent work in NBS. We make some suggestions or proposals there. It's linked clearly back to the SIA framework to say, like, how do we look at jobs in the environmental sector, which we generally refer to as green jobs if they also meet decent work criteria, and then how do we then look at those green jobs and which are the ones that link to nature-based solutions, which leads to a quite a complex diagram, but I think many of you probably are familiar with that. But I think if you look at the kind of total jobs in the environmental sector, which is kind of blue box, what we are concluding is that there's a share there that's jobs, green jobs that link to the environmental sector and are decent, which is the criteria from the ILO. And then within there, you have again a subset of jobs that are green and linked to nature-based solutions, and jobs that are green that are not linked to nature, but are green, for example, to the energy transition or to other areas. And then there's also another box on the right, which are the jobs that are supported indirectly through more investment in nature, which are also jobs we are particularly interested in because we are trying to understand the entire jobs impacts of these investments. So one of the attempts we have in the report is to try and estimate how many people are working in or around nature-based solutions. We worked with quite a number of limitations here. So this was the very first attempt to do this globally. So we had to make some assumptions. We had to take some broad interpretations around NBS and look at, how do what are the proxies of type of work that we could say are either NBS related or NBS linked. We were not able to cover all dimensions of nature-based solutions, which is, also still being actually defined, and taxonomies are still being developed. So there is still a lot of work to be done in that space as well. But and then also we had some challenges, for example, around how do we cover some of the negative impacts. For example, if there are changes in land use due to increased investment in nature, this may have negative impact on some job categories. How do we actually capture some of these dimensions? So these are all challenges that still need to be addressed as we go forward, and we hope to work on in future reports. But these were some of the kind of results that we came up with. So about 74 million people globally working on or on NBS-related activities, spread quite unevenly across the globe, with many more actually in Asia, and many actually working through what we call public employment or payment for ecosystem services programs. So this is where, again, also some of this work stands at the borderline between, are they true jobs as we think of jobs, or are they, but people are paid to do work in many of these contexts, and for that we have included them in the report. We also did an estimate on future jobs. So if investments are made to achieve key biodiversity goals, what are the type of additional jobs we could anticipate, and the estimate we came to was around 20 million additional jobs, although this focuses really on 4 key elements of 4 types of investments: silvopasture, reforestation, mangrove, restoration, and peatlands. So there are many other investments in nature that we didn't include, but these will hopefully also be included in future reports. We also try to understand, what does the work look like? So there's a lot of people working there, but what actually is this work entail? And I think here we encountered, I think, some interesting findings, but also some interesting challenges. So from a sector side, obviously a lot of the work is in agriculture sectors, or would be classified as agriculture or forestry. We looked at there's emerging category of nature-based enterprises, which we try to include. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work around payment for ecosystem services, or public works and public employment programs that work in this space. It's actually the largest category globally. And then there is actually also a substantial number of people, around 16 million we estimated, of people volunteering for nature. So this is also an interesting policy question around how do we harness that, but at the same time, how do we professionalize work in nature if it's so reliant in many countries on volunteering. So some of the key findings around that side, and I think this is something, area from a policy side we like to work on more with many of you here. So observations that a lot of work is actually part-time, seasonal, or temporary in nature. So people are hired to do a specific land restoration project, or they work part-time on doing some work around their farm through payment for ecosystem services, but the rest of the time they spend farming. It's still mostly rural. This is not surprising, perhaps, because most of nature assets are in rural areas, but the urban space is becoming increasingly important. There is professional, high-skilled urban work, and I think many of us here probably fall in that category, where there's research around nature, and how do we quantify it, how do we manage it better, how do we perform it better. There's also a lot of hidden work, as we call it, in that it's work that's on nature, especially in the agriculture sector, but it's hard to untangle. If a farmer adopts more sustainable practices, is he farming? Is he working on nature? Is he doing this combination of the two? How do we disentangle some of these questions? It's quite tricky. And there's also what we call a lot of atypical employment through volunteering, household contracts for households to do specific type of work, which is not technically employment from our perspective, because employment is based on the individual, not on the household. Sometimes they're linked to social protection type payments, so it's kind of a conditional transfer based on the condition being work, which also is kind of at the boundary. And then, of course, volunteering. So maybe as I mentioned, so the report, there will be subsequent series, and some of the way, as we look forward, some of the way topics we are looking at tackling going forward is looking in more depth around, for example, the question of just transition in nature-based solutions and biodiversity, and how this links also to other elements, like, for instance, the IUCN global standards on NBS and how they relate. How can we get more effective job creation or more larger scale job creation through these investments? Because not all growth, even not all green growth, has the same job implications. So how do we influence that? What are the implications for specific sectors? And here, especially agriculture, forestry, fisheries, construction, infrastructure, and tourism are probably the largest one from employment side. And what are the implications? What are the policy tools we need to achieve those job outcomes? Some work perhaps around better monitoring and measuring of jobs in nature, which is also at its infancy. And then lastly, looking at also the long-term impacts of investments in nature. So not only what jobs you get through implementing NBS, but how does it increase in the quality and amount of natural capital actually influence long-term job employment. And I think that's a longer-term work where I think much of your work also relates to. So the 24th edition of the report, I think, is being prepared, and I think 2 specific focus areas we'll have is around skills. So what are the skills needed for increased work in NBS and increased investments? What are there specific constraints in this area? Are new occupations emerging? Are countries geared up to skill their workforce to do this type of work in nature? And then there is also around nature-based infrastructure. And based on the enormous investments that will need to go into infrastructure in general to achieve the SDGs and many other development goals, how do we bring in more nature-friendly investments? And again, what are the job implications of doing that? So I'm going to leave you finally maybe with a quote that from one of our directors who is now retired, but really that this was one of the key outcomes of the report, that as we increase the investment in nature-based solutions, it's important that we do not also scale up the decent work deficits, such as informal work, low pay, and low productivity of many workers involved in the NBS currently face. And really that as we scale up investments in nature, we also, along that, think clearly about the job implications and how we also increase and improve jobs in the process. Because in the end, jobs is one of the key developmental outcomes we are all looking for, politically, economically, socially. And so this is really the longer term goal. So thank you very much for your attention. And Christian, I hand back to you.
Thank you, Michael. I think this is, again, and just looking at the data, it's about data, right? It's about, do we have the right information? Where is this information? Where do we get the information? And I was struck by the fact that there were about 75 million people in decent jobs, and 71 were in Africa. And there were very few actually in other parts, no, sorry, in Asia, and very few in other countries, particularly those, and I have worked in Africa, I've worked in Latin America, and I know that there's an enormous number of people working actually in these spaces. So I hope that as this work goes forward and as this work becomes more known, that we find a way of tapping into this information, making sure that we get more information, that the databases are much more robust in order to be able to really sort of prepare and work towards those programs that help us to really have the right numbers, but also make the right policy decisions. With this, Bekele, please, talking about the economic development in and surrounding protected areas.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, again. Basically, I'm standing in for colleagues Urvashi, Hasita, and Phoebe, who are all women. So they were not able to be here. They are a little bit behind the scene. So I've been asked to stand in for them and make this presentation. So you can see the gender balance a little bit from this presentation itself. So this session is about making the economic case for nature. So nature is not just the air and the water that we breathe, which is free, and yet it's also important for economic systems. There is a real economic and business rationale for investing in nature. That's what we're trying to show from the cases and presentations in this session. So I'm talking about this banking on protected areas paper, which was done by a collaboration with the World Bank and UC Davis, especially Professor Ed Taylor, who has brought together a group of colleagues in terms of making this analysis possible. So going forward, so this is a global, in a way, it has a kind of, the interesting thing about this study is that it brings cases from different continents. And it makes that real example that we need in terms of understanding the economic impact of tourism. Just actually, we are looking at only partially evaluating the services provided by protected areas. In this case, ecotourism or recreational and tourism-related benefits of protected areas. What is the impact of that to the local economy? And is there a case for investing in protected areas? So this is sort of trying to demonstrate that with these cases, 4 cases, 2 on marine protected areas, Brazil and Fiji, and 2 in the terrestrial protected areas, which is in Nepal and in Zambia. You'll see the lower Zambezi National Park and the South Luangwa National Park, which were also mentioned earlier from the cases in Africa, and also the Chitwan National Park in Nepal. So we are using this in terms of demonstrating what is the contribution of tourism income, income that is flowing into the local economy. And this income, of course, generates impact at local level in many different ways. There are direct and indirect ways. And the tourists come into the park, they pay taxes, entry fees and taxes to the government. And also, of course, they spend money in food, on lodging, on activities, resorts, tourist guides, etc., in lodges, and which is a very important income. This also they hire, which these businesses hire wages, workers which pay wages, and this raises income for local communities, and workers pay also taxes to government. So the direct and indirect ways in which the tourist-related income actually generates income in the local economy is quite significant. So with a model that is used here, what is called the local economy-wide impact evaluation, which is LEWI, which is a general equilibrium model to capture this direct and indirect flow of tourist income, and in what ways it makes a difference in the local economy is captured using this model. It's a computable general equilibrium model applied at a local level around the park areas using data, which is collected from these 4 case studies in 4 countries. And it captures this in a very systematic way in terms of measuring what this means in terms of contributing to multipliers that raise incomes for the local people, and also jobs, and also whether investments in these protected areas actually are a good investment in terms of the benefits it generates and the profitability of such investment in the local economy. So first, in terms of really presenting results quickly on the findings. So in this chart, you see that an additional $1 spent by visitors raises incomes in the local economy by $1.5 to $1.9 across the 5 parks studied here. So this is quite interesting in terms of really the multiplier effects that it generates in the local economy. When you capture all of how the money flows within the local economy is quite significant. So a very significant, important level of economic growth and income growth that is generated from $1 coming into a particular park, generating this amount of income growth for a local economy. That's quite significant, which was possible because of the economy-wide modeling which was used here. When you look at the jobs, which is also important, the green decent jobs that this generates. It was particularly higher in the Zambia case because there are the number of tourists which come here, and the linkages in the local economy on how the tourism industry is connected with other businesses in the local area was significant. And you can see the up to 28,000 jobs created in Zambia, and so forth. So when you look at the really not the direct employment in the protected area itself, but in the local economy, the jobs which can be generated through investments in a local economy could be very, very significant. And I think those numbers that you see there, 14 and 30% of the working age populations around the Lower Zambezi and the South Luangwa National Parks, basically being employed in the tourism-related sector is quite significant. So nature, based solutions, in this case, protected areas, can actually be very important engine of economic growth and green jobs in the local economy. So this other finding is actually whether it actually contributes in terms of poverty reduction. We looked at income, we looked at jobs, and this chart is about whether actually this dollars flowing into the local economy there around the protected areas contributes to reducing poverty, and who are the people who are benefiting from this. And across these protected areas, you see that a significant share of the income and the multipliers that go into the households actually are captured by the poorer households, which is important. So it is again, if you want to end poverty on a livable planet, like we say in the bank, and investing in protected areas could actually be very beneficial in terms of really making sure that it reduces poverty. This chart is about the return on government expenditure in protected areas. And you can see that actually, very interestingly, especially in parks where the number of visitors is significant and large. In this case, in the Zambia cases, the return on investment is up to 28 times higher, and at least it's 6 times higher than the cost. So you could see how large returns on investments in protected areas can be. And this is just looking at only, as I said earlier, the benefits from ecotourism. And think about all other ecosystem services that protected areas provide in terms of the provisioning services, regulatory services, habitat services, biodiversity, and all of that. If you bring in all of those services, the return would be many times larger than this. So just looking at returns on investment based on the tourism income itself, the returns are quite significant and impressive. So based on this, what are the key messages? The key messages coming out of this is that conservation and promotion of tourism in protected areas contributes to economic growth, generates significant growth multipliers to the local economy, contributes to poverty reduction and sustainable development, and public investment. In this case, in these 5 cases, is economically attractive, accounting for other ecosystem services, as I said, would significantly enhance the returns to investment in protected areas. And of course, as we heard earlier, workshop is not just work, shopping, and also contributing to the local economy in terms of buying local, hiring local, developing businesses around protected areas, generates and enhances, amplifies impacts of tourism income in the local economy. So hiring rangers locally increases growth multipliers, sourcing goods and services from the local businesses around the protected areas is very important in terms of contributing this income growth multipliers to the local economy, and linkages are important. So when you have a protected area, if you wanted to actually make a significant contribution to the local economy, make sure that it's well linked. Market linkages, linkages between the tourism industry and other businesses in the local economy, and diversifying that is extremely valuable in terms of amplifying this impacts in the local economy. So based on this 5 cases in 4 countries, there is strong economic case for sustainable tourism and conservation of biodiversity in protected areas, and benefit sharing, particularly in terms of reduces conflicts. People-wildlife conflicts particularly come down significantly if you improve also benefit sharing mechanisms, so that the benefits are also captured by the poorer households, low-income households, highly vulnerable communities around the local communities around the protected areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bekele. I think this is again one of those things that by really getting to the ground of these issues and really being able to show what the value is, what the contribution to the local economy is, but then also because what you could see in some of these charts, that it's not only the local community, the local community or the local economy, but also then the national economy. And I do think that this is very important, because at the end of the day, if we really want to make policy decisions that are informed, we need to sort of put this in context, and we need to be able to showcase what the contributions of these economic activities are. So in this respect, I think it's we're looking forward to the third presentation, which is on the economic value of East Africa's wildlife transboundary landscapes. Please, Dr.
Good morning once again. And this particular presentation is based on work that was done for the East African community to promote transboundary conservation, but also management and of natural capital. And it was supported by the USAID, undertaken by Environmental Incentives and Anchor Environmental. I was privileged to be the chief of staff for this particular work as a team lead. I'd like to, of course, let me also acknowledge the program, the World Bank program, for bringing me over so that we can make this available or known to the global community. Now, I'd like to commence by re-emphasizing the importance of ecosystems within East Africa for maintaining wildlife populations and providing services essential for sustaining livelihoods. However, also need to note that most of these uses are consumptive, and because of that, they tend to lead to depletion of this natural capital and, in essence, provision of services associated with those ecosystems. As a result, it's important that policy decisions and choices be made so that there could be sustainable use of this natural capital and provision of these ecosystem services. But quite often, we find that there's not adequate information that policymakers can use to make a case for valuing these ecosystem services, and therefore for land use decisions. Now, in that respect, we worked on 4 landscapes within the East African Community region. At that time, East African Community had 6 partner states. That is South Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Kenya. For equity purposes, we had to work in at least 2 transboundary areas for each country. And we chose, well, actually, the East African Community and partner states arrived on these 4 transboundary landscapes because of the significant economic benefits that they contribute in the region. Now, we didn't focus on protected area systems, but we looked at large landscapes as a whole, but within those landscapes had protected area systems. And I just want to give you an example. If you look at the bottom right side, we have the Great East African Plains. Now, this is a transboundary area between Kenya and Tanzania, southern Kenya, northern Tanzania. And within that area, we have up to 12 protected area systems, including very critical ones like the Mara Serengeti ecosystem, as well as the Tsavo Mkomazi ecosystem, just as an example. Now, in our evaluation, we looked at 9 ecosystem services. And of this, there were 2 on provisioning services, 2 on cultural, but 5 on regulating services. The quantification process was fairly complex, and in case of flow regulation, soil erosion control, and water quality amelioration, we use the integrated valuation of ecosystem service and trade-offs. And in case of carbon, we actually looked at the social cost of carbon. Now, this has been suggested to be the single most important number for thinking about climate change. Now, in this case, it takes into consideration the socioeconomic predictions, climate projections, benefit and cost, and the discount rate. I'd like to quickly look at some of the findings, and has been suggested in the previous presentations that my presentation is dovetailing to. Some of the benefits are local and some of them are at the country level. So using some of the conservative assumptions that we undertook, we found that these particular landscapes generate services of about $300 per hectare per year for the wetlands, $500 per hectare per year for the savanna, $700 for the plains, and $1,500 for the forest landscapes, and that's on average. And the benefits to the different countries also varied, and this was based on the national portions of the different landscape. But they brought benefits that range from between $260 per hectare per year for the wetlands in Rwanda to up to $2,700 per hectare per year for the forests in Burundi. If we looked at the value or the benefits at a global scale, then this also varied in order of magnitude from about $32,000 to $56,000 per hectare per year. If we look at the, I think I need the technical people to support here a bit. Don't seem to get the slides to move. So if we look at the landscape total value to the region, then it's shown in the next slide, but it's at the value of about over $11 billion, and this is based on 2018 as the base year for the work. And you'll realize that in this region, we have a lot of emphasis on tourism as a major source of income to the region. However, cultural services provided about $1.2 billion for that particular year. But then when you looked at other services, then the most important service, the most important thing that perhaps we don't take note of, yeah, thanks. The most important thing that we don't take note of are the regulating services. That is how it controls erosion and water flow. So this is very critical because it constituted about 2/3 of the total value of this landscape. Now, this value is also minuscule as if you compare it with the global value that therefore offers maybe other opportunities for funding. Sometimes people ask that, yes, we make this valuation, but does it really impact people on the ground? And I just wanted to mention a few things, and my colleague Bekele earlier had mentioned how the benefits can go to different communities. Now, in this case, I've just taken an example for Kenya and looking at the information that was available for 2016. Then we found that community conservancies afford different benefits to members, and the economic and livelihood earnings supported over 700,000 households, but created about 4,800 jobs and businesses, etc. We also see that from other studies that scale-up and monitor investment, for instance, regenerative land uses such as afforestation, can add value. Dr. Bekele mentioned how $1 used by tourism adds maybe $1.5 or $1.7 etc. to the area. But we see that in afforestation, an investment of, say, $1.4 can lead to generating an extra $3.9 of economic and social benefits. The other component is the issue of conserving these protected areas. In Africa, there was a study done by Lindsley et al., which was published in 2018, and they showed that adequate management of protected areas in Africa will require an investment of up to $2,000 per square kilometers. Now, they were using the lion as a keystone species, and these are areas that would have good populations of lions. But only $200 per square kilometer is currently being availed. And this is, of course, largely by the national governments and some philanthropy. The private sector only provide about 14%. So there is opportunity here to bring in the private sector more in conservation, but there is definitely a need to increase funding to support conservation of natural capital. Finally, I want to talk about how this information can be institutionalized within the East African community and their respective strategies. Now, in this report, we have also an action plan, and this action plan is based on a theory of change which aligns the interests of people, nature, and businesses. And this can lead to economic benefits and human well-being. Now, to implement this action plan, we suggest implementation at 3 levels: at the regional or transboundary level, where we are looking at harmonizing transboundary management plans to capture interests of different partner states and sectors. Then at the national and subnational levels, we are suggesting a need to identify and enhance public-private partnership that incentivize the integration of biodiversity conservation into subnational development plans. And we also are suggesting interventions at the community level to empower communities to manage natural resources through sustainable enterprises and activities. So I know that given the time, I may not have done full justice to the study we did, but I just want to bring to your attention that the study is available on biodiversity links. It's also available on climate links. And more importantly, we have an interactive app yes, we have an interactive app which is hosted by the Regional Center for Mapping and Resource Development. And I'd like to encourage you to go to the app, and particularly for the policymakers, because you can see the value at very smaller scale. Thank you very much for listening and for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oguge. I think we have, I'd like to put out 3 questions to our distinguished speakers. We have about 10 more minutes, so I hope that we can go around this. And I think then there's also food for thought that people in the auditorium will be able to come back afterwards. I'm not sure that we have the time to sort of go for questions for the panel. But Michael, the jobs you identified are relatively low paying, right? And there's a lot of these jobs are actually volunteering jobs in this sector. So what's the potential? And I'm sure this will be part of maybe the series which you're preparing currently, to really assure that these nature-related jobs are, let's say, high quality jobs, jobs that people want to get into, jobs that will pay well, and are not jobs that require a lot of hard work and relatively dismal pay. I hope these things work.
Hello? Yes, okay, they work. Thanks, thanks, Christian. Yes, I mean, I think we can think about that maybe at 2 levels. I think at one level, the work we're doing here is fundamental in the sense that if natural capital is not valued, I think the work in it's very difficult to value the work building natural capital. So if, and I think if you look at other capital, it's people invest, working in other areas of the economy and building capital are much better rewarded because their outcome of their work is really valued, while in the natural capital space, a lot of the, capital itself is not valued. So that I think is at one level, just valuing natural capital more, I think will filter down into job quality. But then I think there are also more specific items to be looked at in that, for instance, a lot of the work is related to agriculture or forestry where jobs generally are low paying. And so investment need to get caught up in that. So it's also a question, how do we improve productivity, and in agriculture generally will also kind of pull up or push up the quality of jobs in this sector. The skills question is important. So how do we improve the skills and with that the productivity of labor in this sector, because it also leads to. And then I think the last is around how do we organize work in nature, because I think there are, I think this is an emerging, if you could think of it as a kind of an emerging economy, what's the role of enterprises, what's the role of community-based contracting, because this trickles down into the type of jobs, right? Where does the public sector stand, and public investment programs that drive. So I think there are different entry points of how we can work at that, and I think it's probably working at all of them at the same time. But I think fundamentally underlying it, I think, is just if we start valuing natural capital more, I think this will trickle down into having better jobs in the sector as well.
Thank you. And I hope one of which I was thinking, sort of listening to you and also listening to sort of what has been said before, if we really are into greening finance, I hope that at some stage, those jobs, the financial jobs that look at greening, the greening finance and financing green, are actually also considered green jobs, because they're also decent jobs, and I guess they pay also decently. So, Bekele, the study provides recommendations for countries. One of the things that a focus has been was on benefit sharing. And I think that is something where we, in the current conversations where we're talking about carbon finance, finance from nature, how do we actually address the the issue of benefit sharing. What came out of these studies that really provide recommendations or that provide ideas on how to improve benefit sharing? Because that can, in many ways, be a very frustrating part of those who actually are providing these services.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Christian. Yeah, I think benefit sharing is critical. I think one of the issues that we need to be really emphasizing when you do natural capital accounting and economic analysis of protected areas and valuing nature is ultimately also its sustainable management very much depends on engaging the communities. So improving the governance structures within the areas where this natural resources are being used, I think is critically important in the settings in which like this study was done. There is a significant amount of human-wildlife conflict, and the way to manage that is make sure that the communities have a stake in this resource. And one way to, of course, make that happen is that they benefit in many ways, in direct and indirect ways, like this study showed. Being directly employed or being, like through in the economic system, the local economy around the protected area, there is what is called the forward linkages and the backward linkages. So they, the community can provide services to the tourism industry, and the tourism industry can demand many things that can actually generate jobs and provide income for these community members. So making sure that there are clearer collective action rules of engagement in the community and providing management and use rights to the communities with clear leadership roles, governance roles, I think is critical ultimately. And I think this is a direction several countries in Southern Africa are heading into in terms of really enhancing local ownership, reducing conflict, and making sure that the communities manage and benefit from these resources. So there are many ways of dealing with this in terms of enhancing beneficiary, benefit sharing arrangements. The way this study captured is kind of very much based on a survey around the communities, but I think improving governance structures, establishing rules of community engagement, making sure that nobody is left out ultimately from utilizing these resources is critical, and I think there are many good examples of doing that. And that way, I think what was said earlier, if you want to grow fast and steady and over a long term, grow green, I think could be realized. But it needs to be driven by the community owning and using resources and realizing that there is real value, not just global benefits, which seem a little bit fuzzy and intangible for a local community, but also for them to realize that this is something that they can actually move out of poverty and that it makes a difference, and it can put food on the table, and they can send children to school, and they will have access to health services, etc. So there are many ways of improving this benefit sharing mechanism for communities, and I think there are good examples of doing that.
Thank you, Bekele. Dr. Uguge, listening to the study you presented, and to some extent, relatively high values of these ecosystem services, which are not necessarily visible right away. They're using the proxy of the cost or the avoided cost of degradation. How do you see, and I was particularly intrigued by the fact that these are, and I think this is the right way to do it, these are transnational or transboundary landscapes that at the end of the day require a very coordinated approach to their management and their conservation. So how do you see what this study provides in terms of recommendations to these governments looking at the transboundary in order to be able to generate these economic benefits and really making them work for those people who are directly affected by them?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think the first thing that I must say in relation to your question is that the Sectoral Council on Tourism and Wildlife Management for the East African Community adopted the report last year. So already at the regional level, it's considered as an important document to inform policy. Within the report itself, we have information, and this is the reason why we developed the app, whereby each country can actually go in there and look at a very small scale the value of that particular portion of the landscape, and therefore make a decision that could be useful at that community level or a more broader subnational level. So we have suggested specific activities that can be undertaken collectively as a region, but also individually for countries, but also by communities. But most important thing is that we must ensure that the communities are well capacity built, and at the same time, we must engage the private sector into working with the communities. But also, we must develop policies that allow for that public-private sector partnership. At those levels, then they can use this information to develop those policies and plans, and therefore have more sustainable use of the natural capital in their respective areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're coming to an end of this session. I personally found this very interesting because I do think that at this point in time, we are still at a phase where we need to have more evidence, where we need to really create information, where we share this information, where we make sure that wherever we have information, we can get information and use proxy information from other studies, but we sort of intrinsically bring them back and into the national level, while not leaving out the fact that many of our ecosystems are actually transboundary. They don't care about whether there is, for whatever reason, a boundary there. At the end of the day, it's about the integrity of the ecosystem, and it's about the people who live around this. And this is sort of coming back to the point made by Valerie earlier. It's not necessarily about the areas protected. It's about the 70% outside these protected areas that need to be taken care of, because at the end of the day, the spillovers into these protected areas will ultimately not prevent these areas from being degraded. So I think there's a lot of work in progress still there. We look forward to the next series of the Decent Work report, and I hope that we will be sort of continuously having these discussions, that we get more information, that we collect this, that we ensure that this information is being shared, and that this is actually being used in order to be brought into decision making. So thanks everybody, and I guess we're going for a break. Is this what we do? We're breaking again? Yeah. No? Thanks. No, we're going straight. No? Yeah.
No break, yeah.
We're going straight.
Thank you so much. I just want Professor Guge, maybe just a minute, because we have an online audience, and we just got one question here which I wanted you to just quickly take, because it's very important. So the question from our online colleague says, on economic value of East Africa's transboundary wildlife landscape, were there any learnings that emerged related to the sharing or allocation of benefits between different countries? Is there any push for the equality in that sharing of benefits? And also, is there any negative impacts on ecosystem services that occur from one country that could result in the impacts on another country's benefits? So I think this is important because, as Christian said, the fact that some of these ecosystems are transboundary means there has to be some mechanisms around coordination. So maybe you can pick that up, Professor?
Yes. Thank you for the question. Maybe starting from the last question of whether there are impacts on one country that impacts the other. Certainly there is. And we can take the Mara River ecosystem, for instance, which originates from Mau Forest in Kenya and heads all the way into Tanzania. And because of the degradation that happens upstream and a lot of siltation, then we find that the river sometimes dry out at some stage. So it impacts downstream people, which is in Tanzania. So that does happen. Now, the idea is this: can we plan the conservation of the entire river system collectively? So the information we provide can help, both sides of the transboundary area to work together in putting, policies and plans that are coherent across the border and therefore help in sustaining those resources. What was the other component?
So the other part of the question was whether there's been any negative impacts, I think, which you've touched on a little bit. Yeah, from one country to the other, yeah.
That's what I mentioned about just giving the example of the Mara, that the destruction of the upper catchment leads to siltation of the water and therefore less water getting into the lower side. So it impacts services on the lower side, which include fisheries, include mining, include agriculture on the lower side. But also, more importantly, because of the transboundary area, is very important for the migration of the most iconic migration of vertebrates in the world. That is the wildebeest zebra migration. So it can also impact that ecosystem and therefore might impact that migration in the near future. Yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. Can you join me in thanking our panelists and also Christian for very good moderation. I think this has set a good stage for the economic case of nature. So thank you so much, colleagues. Yeah, so we go to the next session, session 2, which is now going to deal with the theme on natural capital data, NCA analysis for biodiversity and ecosystem. And I would like, of course, to invite Dr. Sophia Alroth. Is Dr. Sophia? Okay, good. Thank you, Sophia. And Ms. Christine Magu from the Kenya Bureau of Statistics. And Ms. Etiji Tasria from BPS Statistics Indonesia. And Ms. Perpetua Ikebudu from the National Bureau of Statistics for Nigeria. So I think Christian and Bekele, you are worried about the panel. We have a funnel, female-only panelists. So I think it's a good balance. We have this panel and funnel, okay? So Sophia, over to you.
Hello and good morning, everyone. So originally, this session was supposed to be moderated by the UN Statistical Division. And as many of you know, we collaborate a lot with UNSD in the World Bank when we work on NCA in these different countries. And also they have been organizing these policy forums with us since we started in the WAVE days in 2016 with the first one. But now we had a bad hiccup in the last few days. So unfortunately, Ilaria Di Matteo, who is now chief of the Environmental Economic Accounting Unit in UN Statistics Division, she wasn't able to join us here. So she will still make a recorded presentation for us, but I am trying to fill her shoes here today, moderating the session. So we have this lovely panel here with 3 lovely women who have all been working a lot on environmental economic accounting. And some of you might be a bit confused. We're talking about natural capital accounting, we're talking about environmental economic accounting. And I would say, excuse me, but it's about the same thing. Not everyone agrees with that, but it's basically the same thing. So the thing is that when we do natural capital accounting, we use the system of environmental economic accounting, which is an international standard. And we have here first Christine Magoo from Kenya Bureau of Statistics. And you have been working a lot on environmental economic accounting. And in Kenya, you have been developing both energy and water accounts, and we will hear more about that later on. But welcome, Christine. And then we have Eci Tashria from BPS, Statistics Indonesia. She's an associate statistician at BPS and have also been working a long time with NCA in Indonesia. So with a vast experience on this. Very welcome, Eci. And then we have Mrs. Perpetual, help me here, Ikibudu, right, from the National Bureau of Statistics Nigeria. And Nigeria have also been taking great strides in NCA. And Perpetual, you have been working, you are leading the work on the unit on national accounts and energy and environment statistics, which I think is a lovely combination, actually. So very welcome, Perpetual. So in this session, we will delve more deeply into actually natural capital accounting as such. Many of you know this well, it's your bread and butter, but not everybody does, and it might be a bit fuzzy what to actually talk about. So first, we will have a presentation from Ilaria, who will walk you through what is NCA, and then talk about the global diversity framework and the monitoring framework that comes with that. So what we will focus on in this session is basically on the monitoring framework and what NCA can contribute. Of course, the NCA is part of many of the monitoring frameworks of these global frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals and a lot of these different frameworks, and is a very important building block for those. So we will hear more about what NCA will contribute to in the terms of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So if you please could start the presentation from Ilaria. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 2 of the Global Policy Forum on Natural Capital Accounting. Session 2 is on the importance of natural capital accounting for the Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Ilaria Di Matteo, and I'm the chief of the Environmental Economic Accounts section of UNSD. And it's really unfortunate that I could not join you in person. It has been a last-minute hiccup, and we couldn't be there in Kigali with you all. But this event is part of a long partnership that we have with the World Bank on the organization of this forum that brings together experts on natural capital accounting and also policymakers and private sector to discuss and share knowledge and experiences in the use of natural capital accounting into decision making. This presentation will cover a little bit, aims to provide an overview of the global biodiversity framework, and in particular the monitoring framework for the global biodiversity, and also describe the link between the system of environmental economic accounting and the global biodiversity framework. So we start a little bit with an overview of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. At the COP15 in December 2022, there was a major decision by the Conference of the Parties to move forward with regard to biodiversity. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted together with the monitoring framework, a mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. Also decisions with regard to resource mobilization, capacity building, and information on genetic. The Global Biodiversity Framework covers 4 main goals. Goal A, that is regards the ecosystem, the maintenance and enhancement and restoration of ecosystem. Goal B related to the use of biodiversity and monitor its contribution to people. Goal C related to the benefits of the use of genetic resources that are shared and sustainable increased. And finally, goal D related to the means of implementation. These goals are aimed targets for 2025. But together with these main goals, the biodiversity framework also includes a set of global targets. There are action-oriented targets, and there are we can say 3 main groups. The first group related to the reducing the threats to biodiversity. There is a set of indicators that generally relates to meeting people needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, and then a group of targets that relates to tools and solutions for implementation of the framework. The monitoring framework was adopted by the COP15 to include a set of indicators used to monitor the progress towards the achievement of the goal of the convention. The headline indicators are expected to be used nationally in national biodiversity strategies and action plan and in national reporting, which are legal obligation for the parties. But there are also other indicators such as binary indicators, component indicators, and complementary indicators that could help, that may be used for national and global analysis. Now, the ad hoc technical expert group was established to guide the work on the refinement of the indicator list. So what is called the ATEC group was mandated to give technical advice on unresolved issue with regard to the monitoring framework, give guidance on the use of the indicators in national planning and reporting, and also provide advice on existing capacity, gaps, and data needs. Now I would like to give you a quick overview of the system of environmental economic accounts. The work on environmental economic accounts started actually a while ago. I think it was in the late 70s that the initial thinking about environmental economic accounts started. But it really started from the need, from the realization, first of all, that our economic well-being crucially depends on nature. Biodiversity loss and climate change are the biggest challenges that we are facing today, but the headline indicators like GDP, the unemployment rate and inflation often do not capture important aspects and contribution of the environment. So the SEA really was developed to better understand the interlinkages between nature and the environment in such a way that information was provided in an integrated manner to support decision making. So the system of environmental economic accounting, also referred as natural capital accounting, is composed, is presented in there under two perspectives. One is the CA's central framework, where it looks at the interaction between the economy and the environment in terms of the input into the economy of timber, water, fish, how it is used within the economy, and how these natural resources are returned back into the environment. But it also has a ecosystem perspective, whereby we look at ecosystem resources like forest, river, ocean, and we look how this the benefits of this ecosystem are captured by the economy and used in the economy. Now, the SCA Central Framework and the SCA Ecosystem Account were adopted by the Statistical Commission, the UN Statistical Commission, as international statistical standard. This is a major step forward for the statistical community to recognize this accounting framework as the reference framework at the global level. So the central framework was adopted in 2012, and the ecosystem account was recently adopted in 2021. And what does it mean actually to have this document adopted as a statistical standard? It's quite important, and it's a major step forward because it ingrain the work on including natural consideration into the official statistics of country, and therefore the sustainability also of the information provided is much more supported by having an international statistical standard. The underlying approach of the SCA, of the natural capital accounting, is really to try to organize the data that often already exist into a common accounting framework. So it's often what happens is that information is available in different agencies within the country, and is developed for a specific policy objective and have their own data collection. But this approach, it doesn't build on the synergies between all this information, but bringing all this data together into an accounting framework, we have the possibility to create more information, to have create an integrated and consistent information system, and also are able to expand the value added of all this information. As I mentioned before, the SCA consists of two perspectives, one of the central framework and one on the ecosystem accounts. The central framework, as I said before, looks at the individual resources, extraction, how it is their use within the economy, and the flows back to the environment in terms of waste and residual. The central framework also looks at the environmental expenditure, taxes and subsidies. This is why the sum indicator from goal D related to international, domestic and private funding for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the ecosystem could be identified, could be supported by the environmental expenditure accounts with taxes and subsidies. Also, with regard to the ecosystem accounts, the core ecosystem accounts, the SCA look at, from one side, at the stock accounts. So we look at the ecosystem extent and ecosystem condition. So at a particular point in time, we look at the extent of the different type of ecosystem and their condition. But also in the flow accounts, we look at the benefits and the services provided by this ecosystem. And these are measured in monetary and in physical units. It must be said that during the development of the SE ecosystem accounts, a lot of work has been done in identify or developing classification, both for ecosystem types and for ecosystem services. So the SCA actually contains a classification of ecosystem type that is from the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology, which actually was adopted by the Statistical Commission during this session in March 2024. And also, with regard to the ecosystem services, the SCA contains a reference list of ecosystem services that has been developed based on a review and the consultation of the different typology of ecosystem services. They are currently in use by different stakeholders. So, and the link of these ecosystem accounts with the goal of the biodiversity frameworks are really evident. From the ecosystem extent accounts, we have a very close link with the indicator A2 on natural ecosystem extent. And from the flow account on ecosystem services, we have very direct link with the indicator B1, target 9, and target 11 that specifically make reference to the benefits of to ecosystem services, to the provision of ecosystem services. The global monitoring framework for the global biodiversity framework recognize very much the link with the importance of the links with statistics. In the decision 15.5 of the COP15, there is a clear reference of to the value of aligning national monitoring with the UN system of environmental economic accounting in order to mainstream biodiversity in national statistical system and to strengthen national monitoring system and reporting as appropriate and according to national priority and circumstances. There is also an invitation to the Statistical Commission and other relevant organizations to support the operationalization of the monitoring framework. And when possible, there is the acknowledgement that when possible, indicators are aligned with existing intergovernmental processes under the Statistical Commission, such as Sustainable Development Goals, the Framework for the Development of Environment Statistics, and the SCEA. At the same time, there is also the recognition from the statistical community to support the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In the last year, at the 54th session of the UN Statistical Commission, there was the explicit recognition of the engagement of the statistical community into the Global Biodiversity Framework. And the Statistical Commission called upon National Statistical Office to engage with their biodiversity focal points and called upon the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Accounting to actively engage in the Convention on Biological Diversity process to facilitate and further collaborate on the link between statistics and the statistical community and the biodiversity community. it is important to be aware of the implementation of the SCA around the world. There has been considerable effort by countries to advance on the implementation of the SCA. And we see here a little bit an overview on the implementation of the SCA in various countries, and it's grouped according to different stages of implementation. We have in light blue countries that have started with a compilation of the accounts. Then we have a stage, a little bit darker blue, the countries that are compiling and disseminating the accounts. And then in the darker blue are the countries that regularly compile and disseminate the accounts. I mean, this overview is based on an annual questionnaire that is conducted by on the implementation of the SCA around the world. In these slides, we see the evolution a little bit of the compilation of the SCA in the last few years. Since the first global assessment conducted in 2014, the number of countries implementing the SCA has almost doubled. In the last assessment that was just conducted in 2023, we had 90 countries that compile the SCA accounts, 89 of which compile the SCA Central Framework, and 41 compile the SCA ecosystem accounts. Now, finally, I want to update you a little bit on the recent development on the preparation of the metadata for selected indicators, where the environmental accounting community has been particularly active in the development of the metadata. In particular, under Goal A, the indicator A2 on the extent of natural ecosystem, the metadata have been developed with clear reference to the system of environmental economic accounts. The classification used, the methods used are based on the methodology described in the SCA ecosystem accounts. And also the indicator B1 on the services provided by ecosystem. This indicator is heavily based on the ecosystem service accounts. Now, the UNSD has been convening a group of experts from the SCA Technical Committee on Ecosystem Accounts to review and develop the metadata for these two indicators based in close consultation and cooperation with members of the ad hoc expert group of the CBD, as well of the expert on ecosystem accounts. So with this, and finally here, I would like to share with you some concluding remarks from my side. From one side, I would like to leave the message that the natural capital accounts provide really a powerful tool to integrate environmental and economic data. By using an accounting framework, we use consistent set of classification of concept and methods so that there is a coherence and consistency of the information. It allows, therefore, to analyze trade-off of different policies and also mainstream biodiversity and other economic environmental consideration into decision making. And finally, another point that I would like to highlight is that the natural capital accounts are often implemented in a modular manner. They are very much linked to the policy priority. Usually the starting point for the compilation of this account is by linking it to the national priority. the data availability, our experience has been that often data are available in the country. They might be in different institutions, they might not be immediately shared, but the implementation of natural capital accounting of the SCA is an opportunity to bring the relevant institution in the country together and enhance the integration and the availability of data. These are some of the main points that I wanted to share with you. And I know that you will have a very interesting panel discussion where we will learn from some of the countries that have started with the implementation of the accounts, and we will hear from them some of the benefits and the challenges in the compilation of the environmental accounts. And with this, I thank you all for your attention, and I wish you a very successful remainder of the meeting, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Ilaria, if you are with us now online, I really want to thank you for this very useful walkthrough of the natural capital accounts and the global biodiversity framework. I think this was so important to really ground us in the things that we are here to discuss. So thank you. And I would like to pick up on some of the last points made by Ilaria, that really the accounts are about reliable, consistent data that is, adopted by all the agencies within a country. So exactly what Ilaria was talking about, that what you often find is that statistics will sit in different line ministries and agencies. They might use different classifications that make sense for that agency, but it's very hard to reconcile the different data. It's not always easily shareable. So this is one of the real challenges that you have when you compile the natural capital accounts. And it really takes a whole of government approach to do this. And this is also one of the great benefits of doing NCA, that you are working together across the whole government. So I would like to hear a bit from our panel now here on your specific experiences on compiling NCA in your countries. So if you would like to elaborate on what you have been doing, what have the challenges been to produce NCA, and specifically also on the use of the accounts. How have they been used, and how are the conversation and the communication been with the policy users of the data? So if we could start with you, Christine, if you could share with us the experiences from Kenya.
I think so. Right, good afternoon. I'd start by saying it's a great honor to be here, talking to you about our experiences in Kenya on natural capital accounting. The journey of national capital accounting for me, natural capital accounting started in 2017, which is about 7 years now. And it's been quite a journey. And being a statistician and being thrown in the line of environmental accounting, it was quite not very easy to adjust to the new ways, the new jargons in the environmental sector. But what I will say is that accounts are very important to be produced, and not only produce them, but also have them disseminated. Because we always say if you produce the accounts and they're not disseminated, then really you've done a lot of work for not very good reasons. And once you have these accounts disseminated, then you also have to follow them up to find out who is using these accounts, how is policy receiving these accounts. The accounts can be quite technical in nature, and so it's quite hard without coordination of government, like Sophia is saying, in the whole of government approach. It's quite hard for you to just push an account, for example, to a line ministry and leave it for them to understand what you're talking about. And so communication is one thing that I found to be very essential. You first have to understand who is using your accounts, the different audiences, and then you have to communicate the outcomes of the accounts to each of your audiences to ensure that they have maximum impact. And eventually the whole idea is to link them to policy, to have them being used in decision-making in your country. So yeah, I think that's, I'll leave it there. But in a nutshell, that's what I think is most useful in accounting. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you for bringing up that point on communication. That is really key, and as we've heard you say, I mean, if you are doing this and not disseminating, then you know it's totally pointless what you do. You almost said that. Yeah. Okay, Etchi, if we could turn to you and the experience from Indonesia.
Yes, thank you, Sophia. In my experience, yes, what Christine said, communication is one factor to be have in compiling the NCA or environmental ecosystem, environmental economic accounting. Other thing is the whole government thing that you mentioned, because each ministries and institution carry out their own mission. So we have to, the National Statistic Office have to know what each ministries are responsible for, and what kind of account that we want to bring to the policy maker to be used in their decision-making process. The communication in bringing together the whole of government in working together as a data provider and NSO as the compiler of the accounts, and also the policy decision maker is an important key in my experience in Indonesia. And I'm happy to inform you that nowadays the NCA or SEA accounts has been used by many ministries or agencies in Indonesia. Another thing is the lack of data that you mentioned. Sometimes we need data from sectoral ministries, but because of the statistical capacity in their units are not very good, then the statistical office can bring their strength in building the statistical capacity within the ministries, so that together, not just the account that we compile, but we also strengthen the capacity of the ministry to produce good quality data that needed to compile the accounts. That's my experience.
Thank you so much, Etchi. And also really this thing to have good quality data that you can really rely on. I mean, we've seen so many interesting studies here today with a lot of interesting numbers. These have to rely on good data, and that people can recognize that this is really something that you can rely on, that it will be the correct information, and it's possible to go back and see how it was compiled. So it's not an ad hoc thing that was done by somebody, and since it's somebody's laptop, you can't verify that information. So that's a very important point. So Perpetual, if we could now hear from Nigeria.
Yeah. Good afternoon, all. I remain Perpetual from Nigeria. Our journey with natural capital accounting, I would say, started last year when the World Bank Group, through the Global Program on Sustainability, came to our office to build capacity in order to develop the several accounts on natural capital accounting. So what we did in National Bureau of Statistics was to identify the stakeholders so as to gather those data we need to compile those accounts. And those that have the technical expertise in those data that we are gathering. Our own is just to collect data, but we need those who are producing those data to be part of it. So what we did was to constitute a national steering committee. So from different MDAs and some private sectors. So from different MDAs, we picked our technical working group who will work on the different accounts we are to compile. So for now, I would say that Nigeria, we are at the stage of developing the accounts. We are still a baby in the system, but a lot of capacity has been built and more will be built so that we can develop more accounts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is really the start of a journey. And some of the countries here started a long time ago, and some are just starting up. So I think this is also a possibility for you all to learn from each other. Could we just, out of interest, see who of you in the room are statisticians? Could we just have a quick show of hands? Okay. And we can see, you might think that this field is dominated by women. It is not. We have some men as well. So you will recognize then the experience from these statistical offices, and I'm sure also the statisticians from line ministries will recognize some of the challenges. So now turning to the GBF and that monitoring framework, I mean, this is challenging in the way that the ecosystem accounts are the newest. They were just recently adopted. This is something that's completely new for many statistical offices, and particular national accounts, because it takes totally different skills, and there's totally different type of data than you normally have. So it's a totally different animal from compiling emission accounts, energy accounts, and what have you. So if we could hear your thoughts on that, what are the challenges with this? And how do you see moving forward? What are the low-hanging fruits that you could possibly get? And how do you have a plan for tackling this to inform this framework? Could we start with you again, Christine?
Thank you, Sophia. Well, with the GBF, as you rightly said, it's a whole new area, especially for statistical offices. Most statistical offices, ourselves included, were quite comfortable with the central framework. It followed largely the principles in the national accounts, and we were able to follow through because it was in the line of our work. But when we now start talking about the ecosystem accounting framework, this is very different. It not only needs statisticians, it now needs GIS experts, it needs environmental experts, and some of this, especially with the environmental experts, these are professionals who are not housed in the statistics office. And so most statistical offices have tended to sort of, for lack of a better word, shy away from the ecosystem accounting framework. But yet there's so much that we can get out of implementing ecosystem accounts within the national framework. One of the good things that we have realized since 2021 when the CIEA was launched is the power of coordination, the power of working with line ministries, like ministries of environment, the power of working together, the power of stakeholder collaboration. And now in Kenya, we have come up with what we are calling the National Plan for Advancing Environmental Economic Accounts. And this plan talks in detail about what accounts we plan to implement in the next 4 years. It also talks about the governance structure, how we want the implementation to be governed. We've gone ahead to even give the chairing rights to our treasury, because we believe if we have our treasury on board, then we'll have money to implement this. And it's great that our treasury are represented in this room. So working together is the way that national statistics offices can implement this, even in the long run, as we wait to have the systems in place within the statistical offices to sort of do this. I think one of the main challenges that we have with the GBF is the silo approach, not just the GBF really, but most of these policies that we need to implement that can be monitored or can be accounted for using the SIA. It's a sort of silo approach, and I think Ilaria has talked about it. The silo approach that is being done to it, you find most government agencies are actually working on some data sets. They have a lot of data sets, particularly in Kenya. We have different agencies with different data sets for different things, and nobody knows who has, everybody has something. And that sort of silo approach is what we need to work on, to bring everybody together and then to be able to implement these accounts together. The other thing that I would say is the methodology. You find that different government agencies, private sector is on it, the civil societies are doing something using different methodologies. It's very hard to integrate all of these data sets from the different sources. And so I would also go back to coordination. Luckily in Kenya, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which is the statistics office, has by law been given that mandate to coordinate our national statistics system, which is basically all producers and users of statistics. And I think we are growing into it, but it's the high time that we bring everybody together and just continue monitoring some of these accounts. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christine. Echi, we go to you.
For Indonesia, this is my first time hearing about a global biodiversity framework that have 4 goals. A is ecosystem, B, the use of biodiversity, C, benefit use of genetic, and D, means of implementation. I think these all 4 goals that included in global biodiversity has been implemented while we conduct ocean ecosystem accounting in Indonesia. We bring together different type of agency, for example, geospatial agencies, statistical agencies, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of Finance, and other academics that we compile the ocean accounting, and the result is ecosystem ocean extent, the benefit use of ecosystem oceans services, and a lot of things. And Statistic Indonesia also conducted studies on biodiversity last year. Some challenges that we face during the studies are capturing or measuring the red list species, because the species are migrating in their natural habitat in a forest conservation area, for example, that statistician or we as a data collector cannot capture their existence. So we thought that the Ministry of Environment and Forestry should provide this kind of data. But unfortunately, during the discussion with them, they said that the capacity to collect the data is also limited in their units. So we need to strengthen their statistical capacity in order to measure the migrating species living in the natural habitat, for example, red list species. Yes. So what need to be done? I think we need to use common standard related to data and method in measuring biodiversities, and also align with existing framework, the necessity to collaborate with line ministries and strengthening capacity statistical system in the line ministry is in in direct needs right now to implement the global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this is also the thing, right, that the monitoring framework is so powerful, but because it actually makes the country look at what information do we have about this? What do we actually know? And you have these conversations within all the different agencies. And another thing is also that it doesn't sit with the environment. The GBF is not something that sits with the Ministry of Environment and is not, relevant to the other ministries. I think this is also something that is extremely important. And if countries don't realize that, then it's much harder to actually make success. So Perpetual, please, what thoughts do you have on this?
In Nigeria, just as my colleague from Indonesia said, the GBF, though it's not new to me, but in MBS, we are willing to do those things, but the capacity needs to be built so that even when we are compiling, we should know what we are compiling. And we need to identify the key agencies that we need to collaborate with to develop those accounts. Like we just finished working on our ecosystem and land accounts. Picking the data sets was the initial problem we encountered. Though the data were there, but not in the format that we should use them. But with the help of the World Bank, the United Nations, some of those data were recoded to suit what we have. So in Nigeria, we need capacity building. A capacity building to develop the accounts so that we can know, we can have a, how do I even put it? Have a robust data. In Nigeria, you can't use any statistics if they did not come through National Bureau of Statistics. We have an act. It must pass through the statistical office for it to be usable. So in MBS, we need a lot of capacity building to develop more. As I said before, the NCA journey started last year. We are just new in the system. So a lot of capacity needs to build so that we can develop more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing up that very important aspect. And I also think that sustainability in that regard, in capacity building, is so important because, people shift jobs, they move on. We can see that all these very good natural capital accountants in countries, they are moving up to higher levels because they are needed there. So we have to have this growing from below to have regrowth in the capacity. So I think with this, we will end this session. I would have loved to have some questions from the audience as well, but lunch is awaiting. So please join me in giving a warm hand to this fantastic panel. Thank you, Christine, Etienne, for helping.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. Just before we do a final round of applause, as I say, we have online audience, and we have another question here, which Sophia has gladly accepted to take. Can you please explain again the difference between natural capital accounting and environmental economic accounting? What is the appropriate term when you are implementing accounts? Sophia.
Well, this is a personal response, but I like natural capital accounting. I think it's good. I think it's very catchy. It tells you about what is actually the thing. It's the natural capital that you have. So if you say the system of environmental economic accounting, you start to sort of doze off a little bit. That's the main difference to me. But the real difference is that this started off as a satellite account with the national accounts. It was called, and it is called, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. This framework, as you've seen, it's huge. And it includes also some accounts on subsidies, on environmental-related goods and services, and these type of monetary accounts that are not anchored in nature per se is very relevant to policy, but it's not really about the natural capital thing. So, as the World Bank, when we work with countries on natural capital accounting, we typically don't do these accounts. We want to do the ones that measure how you use natural capital, how you degrade, deplete it, and what you are impacting the natural capital through pollution and waste. So you could say that natural capital accounting is a little bit of a subset, almost the whole of the SIA, but not entirely. But you will find people who say it's exactly the same thing. So it's a matter of preference. I leave it up to you, dear audience, to choose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I think we all learned a lot from this session. Can we give them another round of applause? Okay, so we at that stage where I would like to take a break for lunch and continue our networking. So I want to give you a trick. If you want to take lunch this afternoon, how many have a cards? Lunch vouchers. Okay, this is about what, 90%? Some 10% do not have. If you do not have, how many have their name tags? Okay, just turn around your name tag and you'll see a little card behind there. Did you find it? Okay, so we will have lunch just down where we had breakfast, just one floor down. They'll ask you for the lunch voucher, so give it to them. If you don't have a voucher, please come and see me, or you come and see Lisa. Lisa is here at the back. Yeah, Lisa is wearing is that red or? Yeah, please see her. And to our colleagues online, we are having a break until 1:30 Kigali time, so we'll be back in exactly an hour's time. Okay, enjoy your lunch, and let's remember to keep time. Thank you so much.